You might have been right, she forced out, the words clearly costing her a great effort. I didn't respond, simply waiting. She looked out the window at the snow-covered garden. I only ever wanted to protect us. The family name, it's everything. I understand that, I said quietly. But a reputation built on a foundation of lies isn't a reputation. It's a house of cards. And the wind always comes. Mother. A single tear traced a path through the wrinkles on her cheek. It was the most honest emotion I had ever seen from her. That night, over a simple dinner, David reached across the table and took my hand. You did the right thing, the hard thing, he said. What happens now? I looked out at our garden, pristine and silent under a blanket of snow. It felt like a clean slate. I think, I said, a genuine smile touching my lips for the first time in weeks. I'd like to look for a new house, somewhere away from here, a fresh start. David squeezed my hand, his eyes full of a love that had been tested and had held firm. Okay. This wasn't an ending. It was a brutal, painful pruning, but sometimes, that is the only way new growth can begin. 1 year later, a gentle, almost tender snow was falling outside the large kitchen window of our new home, dusting the pines in our yard in western Minnesota. There was no bitter wind, only a peaceful hush. Inside, the rich, savory aroma of roasting turkey filled the air. Smells incredible, David said, coming up behind me and wrapping his arms around my waist, resting his chin on my shoulder. It's getting there, I said, leaning back into his embrace. On the kitchen table, next to a vase of fresh winter greens, lay a folder from the adoption agency. Our application was progressing, each form filled out feeling like a promise to the future. Mother resides in her comfortable facility. The loss of her social power has been its own form of therapy, forcing an introspection she had always avoided. During my last visit, she spoke with a clarity that surprised me. I was wrong, Amy, she said, her words still slow but deliberate. I confused the performance of happiness for the real thing. Her physical therapy is ongoing. The paralysis has improved but remains. Her heart, I think, is just beginning its own rehabilitation. Linda's fall was hard. The divorce was finalized, with John gaining full custody. She sees Tommy for supervised visits once a month. The loss of her church community, her social standing, and the man she risked it all for has left her hollowed out and adrift. She came by last month, asking for money. Her beauty faded, her eyes desperate. I had to say no. For the first time, I stopped enabling the cycle of secrecy and rescue. She left angry, but I knew it was the only way she might ever truly find her own bottom, and from there, maybe her own way back up. John, to his eternal credit, has been a rock for Tommy. He has embraced the boy as his own in every way that truly matters, proving that fatherhood is not a matter of blood, but of love. He thanked me once, his voice thick with emotion. You gave me the truth, Amy, as painful as it was. It set us free. The church has begun to heal. Under new leadership, the repaid funds have eased the financial strain, though the moral stain on its history will take longer to fade. David picked up the adoption papers, a hopeful smile on his face. You know, by next Thanksgiving, this table might be a little more crowded. I squeezed his hand, my heart full of a quiet, resilient joy. This was our chosen family. This was a bond being built not on bloodlines or appearances, but on truth, choice, and a love that had weathered a storm. In the oven, the turkey was turning a perfect, golden brown. The scent that filled our home was no longer a ghost of bitter memories, but the warm, nourishing aroma of a future we were building ourselves, one honest day at a time. The coffee was a welcome warmth against my palms, a small defense against the sudden deep freeze that had sealed Minnesota in a crystalline grip overnight. Beyond the window of our Eden Prairie home, the world was a study in contradictions. Autumn's final, tenacious leaves, clad in rust and gold, lay prisoner under a blanket of pristine, glittering frost. Each blade of grass and fallen edge sparkled under the low, pale sun, a diamond-dusted landscape announcing winter's imperious arrival. Another Thanksgiving was upon us, a season of supposed warmth that, for me, always carried a distinct and familiar chill. On paper, my life was a masterpiece of suburban success. My career as a senior accountant was on a steady, upward trajectory. My marriage to David was a comfortable harbor. built on mutual respect and a gentle, abiding affection. We lived in a beautiful home in an upscale neighborhood. There was nothing to want for, and yet, a single, persistent fault line ran through the foundation of my picture-perfect existence, my relationship with my mother. "Amy, are you nearly ready?" David's voice pulled me from my thoughts. I turned to find him already impeccably dressed, his travel suitcase standing sentry by the door. As an IT executive, he wore his ambition well, tailoring it with a gentle soul that understood the demands of my own career. He was my greatest supporter, my quiet champion, and the guilt he felt over missing this Thanksgiving was written in the slight furrow of his brow. "Yes, I'm fine, don't worry," I answered, forcing a smile onto my lips. "Did you tell your mother?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. I did. She was not happy. I mimicked her tone, a perfect replica of her clipped, disappointed diction. "I can't believe you're putting work before family, David, on Thanksgiving." My mother, Martha Anderson, was a pillar of the First Presbyterian Church, a woman who wielded her social influence with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. She managed charities and orchestrated events, reigning as the community's unspoken queen. For her, Thanksgiving was never just a meal. It was a stage upon which her ideal family would perform, a living testament to her impeccable taste and lineage. That word, lineage, was her favorite. She often spoke of our pure bloodline, a phrase that curdled in my stomach. It was her shorthand for pride in a family long rooted in this soil, a generational legacy. But since the miscarriage 2 years ago, those words had taken on a darker, crueler meaning. In the aftermath, her affection for me had become a careful performance, and I had begun to catch fleeting glimpses of something else in her eyes when she looked at me, not grief, but something disturbingly like relief. This stood in stark contrast to the escalating fervor of her doting on my sister Linda's 5-year-old son, Tommy. David placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. "Are you going to be okay?" "Yes," I said, turning to face him fully. "I'll handle it my way." He nodded, a silent communication passing between us. He understood the delicate dance I performed with my family, which was precisely why he felt so guilty about leaving me to it alone. After I saw him out, a gust of frigid air slicing through the foyer, I steeled myself for the day ahead. Tomorrow was the main event. The entire clan would gather at Mother's imposing white colonial for the annual performance. Linda would be there with her husband, John, a decent man who ran an honest real estate business but whose eyes had recently begun to cloud with a quiet, confused concern whenever he looked at his wife. For Linda had been acting strangely, growing increasingly and conspicuously close to Adam Foster, the charismatic young assistant pastor who had arrived 6 months prior. A deep, weary sigh escaped me. Tomorrow would be a spectacle of elegant Lenox china, flickering silver candlesticks, and a golden brown turkey. But beneath the polished veneer of tradition, I could feel the cracks spreading. With my accountant's calm, rational mind, I could see the numbers not adding up. A significant truth was being hidden, and my every instinct told me the balance was about to be audited. What was coming would shatter our family's carefully constructed myth. But perhaps, I thought as I watched the first defiant snowflakes of the season begin to fall, that destruction was a necessary reckoning long overdue. Thanksgiving morning. The drive to my mother's house was a silent procession through a world washed in grim shades of gray. I turned the car's heat to its maximum, but the chill I felt was bone deep and immune to such simple remedies. The sky was a sheet of lead, and the snowflakes, now falling with more purpose, danced like lost spirits in the wind. The Anderson family home stood as a monument to generational stability in one of Eden Prairie's most prestigious enclaves. The large white house, with its black shutters and manicured grounds, was less a home and more a landmark. The circular driveway was already a gallery of familiar cars. The relatives had begun to gather. I was barely across the threshold when my mother's voice, polished and sharp, found me. "Amy, you're here." And David. She was already perfectly turned out in a navy blue dress and pearls, her graying hair a helmet of impeccable style. Every detail, from her subtle makeup to the way she held herself, was calculated for maximum effect. "He sends his deepest apologies, Mother." "An unavoidable meeting," I explained, my voice even. "I see," she said, and the 2 words were laden with a lifetime of judgment. "I suppose it can't be helped. You young people always seem to find work more pressing than family. The sarcasm was a thin, sharp needle. I chose to ignore it, diverting to the kitchen under the pretext of helping. The kitchen was a hive of steam and familiar scents. Aunt Carol and cousin Jennifer were orchestrating the sides, their conversation halting as I entered. The turkey, vast and bronzed, sat regally in the oven. "Amy, dear, so glad you're here," Carol said, her eyes flickering over me with an expression I knew all too well, a messy cocktail of sympathy and pity that had defined every family interaction since my loss. The doorbell chimed, and a moment later, the house was filled with a new energy. "Tommy, my darling boy, come to Grandma." Mother's voice transformed, becoming syrupy and warm as she rushed to envelop her grandson. 5-year-old Tommy giggled, the unquestioned prince of this domain. Behind him, Linda preened, her smile radiating smug satisfaction. Her husband, John, followed, offering me a tight, anxious smile that didn't reach his eyes. The pre-dinner chatter in the living room was a familiar drone of church activities, neighborhood gossip, and school stories, but to my ear, it sounded hollow, a script everyone was reading from without feeling the words. I noted, with interest, how Linda's contributions carefully excised any mention of the new assistant pastor. Finally, Mother's voice cut through the murmur. "Everyone, dinner is served." We filed into the dining room, a scene of curated perfection. The heirloom silver knife, passed down through generations, lay beside the magnificent bird. We took our seats, bowed our heads, and Mother began the prayer, her voice ringing with practiced piety and absolute authority. After the amens, the serving began. Mother carved the turkey with efficient, proud strokes. It was then that Aunt Carol aimed her first carefully calibrated dart. "Amy, you're always so focused on that career of yours," she began, her tone deceptively light. "Don't you think it's time to find a new purpose? A family needs its center." Cousin Aaron, ever the eager lieutenant, nodded. "It's true. We must remember that God's plans are mysterious. Our trials are given to us for a reason." The subtext was a sledgehammer. I focused on the intricate pattern of my plate, my jaw tightening. Then came Mother's contribution. As she carefully laid a slice of white meat on a plate, she spoke in an airy, conversational tone that was utterly grotesque given the words she uttered. "Well, but in a way," she mused, "your misfortune was a blessing. It saved our bloodline from being tainted." The words didn't just land, they iced the entire room, freezing the very air in our lungs. The silence was absolute, violent. Then, a nervous, desperate tittering broke out among the relatives, a cruel and frivolous sound that was somehow worse than the silence. And then, the coup de grace. My sister, Linda, reached over and stroked her son's hair, beaming with vicious pride. "After all," she said, her voice sweet and poisonous, "a pure-blood grandchild is really all Mother needs." Time didn't just stop, it shattered. I heard the sound of my own breathing, too loud in the dead quiet. With a calm I did not feel, I laid my fork neatly on my plate, its click against the china unnaturally loud. I pushed my chair back and stood. Every eye at the table was wide, staring, a gallery of stunned faces. "Amy," my mother's voice finally held a tremor, a crack in her flawless facade. "Please excuse me for a moment." I turned and walked out, my steps measured and firm. Behind me, as I reached the living room, the stunned silence broke into a frantic, hushed buzz of confusion. I stood before the large living room window, watching the snow now falling in thick, earnest waves, blanketing the world in a quiet white. The spectacle had a paradoxical effect, calming the storm within me. I didn't hear him approach, but I felt his presence. When I turned, John was standing there, his face a mask of anguish and resolve. "Amy," he said, his voice low and strained, stripped of all its executive confidence, "I need to talk to you. It's Linda." I simply nodded, my accountant's mind already assembling the pieces. He glanced over his shoulder, ensuring we were alone. "She's not herself. These meetings with that assistant pastor." He swallowed hard, the words clearly costing him everything. "I want to get a DNA test for Tommy. Will you help me?" In that instant, all the vague anxieties and disconnected suspicions snapped into a single, devastating picture. My intuition had been right. The audit was beginning. I understand, I answered, my voice quiet but clear in the hushed room. The truth, once revealed, would burn our family's world to the ground, but as I looked into John's desperate eyes, I knew it was a fire that had been smoldering for years, and it was finally time to let it burn. The investigation. 3 days after Thanksgiving, the silence in the house was a physical presence. David was still away, and the only sound was the methodical click of my keyboard in my home office. The festive facade had been stripped away, leaving only the bare bones of a cold investigation. John's email glowed on my screen. He'd ordered a commercial DNA testing kit. It was a start, but my skills lay in a different kind of evidence, the story told by numbers, the patterns hidden in financial records. Using my audit access to the First Presbyterian Church's accounts, I began my work. I started with the period since Adam Foster's arrival, and there it was, almost immediately, a suspicious regularity, a modest but fixed sum, withdrawn monthly from the Charitable Activities Fund and funneled into a private account. It was clever, but to my eye, its consistency was a glaring red flag. Amy, what are you working on so intently? I startled, minimizing the screen with a swift click. My mother stood in the doorway of my study, her eyes sharp and probing. Just catching up on work, Mother. Preparing for the year-end church audit, I said, layering my voice with a casualness I didn't feel. I see. Her expression was a masterclass in neutral suspicion. Your behavior at dinner, Amy, it was truly disrespectful. You must think of the family's reputation, especially now. Why especially now? I asked. Linda, she said, and I caught a flicker of something, pride, calculation, in her eyes. Assistant Pastor Adam has recommended her for the head of the youth department. It's a significant position. The youth department, a role with immense influence over the church's future. Why Linda? The question hung in the air between us, heavy and unasked. The moment she left, I dove back in, now cross-referencing Linda's digital footprint, credit card statements, phone logs, social media check-ins. The pattern was undeniable. Every Wednesday afternoon, a 2-hour window where she claimed to be at church meetings that did not, according to the official schedule, exist. Then, I found the invoice, not a hint, but a receipt. A modest business hotel on the outskirts of Minneapolis. Linda's credit card had been charged there, like clockwork, every Wednesday for the past 6 months. I picked up the phone and called John. I found something, I said, my voice low. What is it? His voice was tense. A hotel, weekly visits, paid for with her card, and some of the ancillary charges correlate with withdrawals from the church's charitable fund. A heavy, despairing sigh traveled down the line. That's not all, John, I continued, pulling up another record. When Tommy was born, Adam Foster was here. He was a seminary student doing a short internship at First Presbyterian. It's all in the church archives. The silence on the other end was the sound of a man's world collapsing in slow motion. We might not need to wait for the DNA results to know the truth, I said softly. He didn't answer. I could only hear his ragged breathing, a testament to the devastating proof taking shape on my screen. The evidence mounted over the next week. As an accountant, I followed the money, and it told a sordid story: restaurant receipts, more hotel records, and a series of cleverly disguised transfers between Adam and Linda's accounts, camouflaged within the church's legitimate charitable outflow. It was obvious to a professional's eye. But my audit had an unexpected scope creep. Buried in the church's financial history, I found another set of irregularities, small, consistent misappropriations of funds by Martha Anderson herself. The amounts were trivial to the overall budget, but the hypocrisy was staggering. It was a weapon, powerful and destructive, sitting in my hands. I wasn't sure I wanted to wield it. The turning point came on a quiet afternoon. Linda arrived at my door unannounced, her face pale and her eyes blazing with a mixture of fury and raw fear. "You're investigating me," she accused, storming into my study before I could utter a word. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie. Adam knows. Someone with professional access is digging through the church's financial records. It's you, isn't it? It has to be you." Her composure was cracking, panic seeping through the seams. "Please, Amy." Her voice broke, shifting from anger to desperate pleading. "You have to stop. If this gets out, Mother, the church, everything will be ruined. I looked at my sister, truly looked at her, and saw not a villain, but a terrified woman trapped in a gilded cage of her own making. Then tell me the truth, Linda, I said, my voice firm yet devoid of malice. All of it. And so, she broke. The words poured out of her in a torrent of confession. Meeting Adam 5 years ago during his internship. Their instant, secret connection. The affair. Tommy's true paternity. Does Mother know? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Linda covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Yes, she whispered, her voice muffled. She found out. She helped me hide it. She said we had to protect the family, the bloodline. In the devastating silence that followed her confession, the only sound was the sudden, piercing ring of my cell phone. I glanced at the screen. It was the hospital. The world seemed to narrow to that single point of contact between the phone and my ear. I hung up slowly, the plastic shell clicking softly in the profound silence of my study. When I turned, Linda was still there. Her earlier defiance evaporated, replaced by a pallor that made her look ghostly. What is it? She whispered, her voice thin and reedy. Amy, what's happened? It's Mother, I said, the words tasting like ash. She's had a stroke. At the church, I watched the information detonate behind my sister's eyes. The carefully constructed facade of the dutiful daughter, the protected favorite, crumbled into sheer, unadulterated terror. The drive to Fairview Southdale Hospital was a silent, frantic blur through a world being gently smothered by falling snow. The flakes were thicker now, a relentless, quiet army obscuring the road, mirroring the white noise of panic filling my mind. The intensive care waiting room was a stark, fluorescent-lit purgatory. The air smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee. Among the handful of anxious faces were the stern, grim visages of church elders, their presence a suffocating blanket of judgment. And there, standing slightly apart, was Adam Foster. His hands were shoved deep into his pockets, his charismatic charm replaced by a shifty, cornered anxiety. He wouldn't meet my eyes. The doctor, a woman with a tired but kind face, found us. She's stable for now, she began, her voice a low, measured hum against the beep of distant monitors. We caught it early, which is in her favor, but there's significant right side paralysis. The road to recovery will be long, and full function may not be fully restored. She paused, her gaze sweeping over our fractured family. The precipitating event appears to have been a severe shock. She collapsed shortly after opening her mail at the church. Linda made a small, choked sound. A shock? From what? The head elder, a man named Mr. Gable, whose family had known ours for generations, stepped forward. His expression was grim. It was a letter, he said, his voice gravelly with disapproval. Anonymous. It contained allegations, detailed financial records suggesting long-term misappropriation of church funds, and, he hesitated, his eyes flicking toward Adam with unmistakable contempt. Documentation of an inappropriate relationship between Mr. Foster and a member of his congregation. The air left the room. I didn't need to look at the printed sheets Mr. Gable reluctantly handed me. My own investigation had already uncovered the truth they detailed, but seeing it there, in black and white, sent out into the world by an unknown hand, was a different kind of violence. Later, in a smaller, private family waiting room, the final pillars of our world gave way. David was there, having driven straight from the airport, his suit rumpled, his face etched with concern and guilt for not being there sooner. Linda, John, David, and I formed a tense circle. John, his face a mask of stoic grief, spoke first. He didn't look at Linda. The DNA results came back. He held up a single sheet of paper as if it were made of lead. Tommy is not my biological son. The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum that sucked all sound and hope from the room. Linda made a move as if to reach for him, but aborted the gesture, her hand falling uselessly to her side. She began to cry, soundless sobs that shook her shoulders. Linda, I said, my voice quiet but unwavering in the sterile air. No more lies. Tell us everything. About Mother. About Adam. All of it. What followed was a halting, broken confession, pulled from her like shrapnel. The story of a young seminary student 5 years ago. Secret, frantic trysts, the panic of a pregnancy, and our mother's swift, ruthless solution. A hastily arranged marriage to the kind, stable John Anderson. Mother knew. Linda wept, the words finally freeing themselves. She knew everything. She paid Adam. She gave him money from the church to keep him quiet, to make him go away. It was all to protect the family, the reputation. The pieces of my audit snapped into their final, damning places. The irregular withdrawals, the payments to an unnamed account. It wasn't just for a sordid affair. It was hush money, authorized by the matriarch to preserve her precious illusion. The church board meeting that evening was a formality. With the evidence I provided, corroborating the anonymous letter, their hands were tied. Adam Foster was dismissed on the spot, his reputation in tatters. My mother was officially removed from all her positions of authority within the church she had helped define for decades. Linda was quietly but permanently shunned, her name becoming a synonym for scandal in our community. The following week, the local paper ran the story on the front page: Scandal rocks Eden Prairie Church. Financial misconduct and moral failure alleged. The Anderson name, once a symbol of unwavering piety and tradition, was now a cautionary tale. Sitting with a medical social worker to discuss mother's long-term care, the options were laid bare. Given the extent of her paralysis and the need for constant rehabilitation, a skilled nursing facility would be most appropriate, the woman said gently. Linda erupted. You can't just warehouse her. She's our mother. Even now, you're refusing to see reality, I said, my voice weary but firm. This isn't about punishment, Linda. It's about what she needs: professional, constant care. This decision is for the best for everyone. We settled on a high-end facility on the outskirts of the city. The cost was staggering, but between the restitution demanded by the church and what Linda and I could contribute, it was managed. On the day of her discharge, I was alone with Mother in her sunlit room. She was frail in a way I had never seen her, the right side of her face still sagging, her speech slightly slurred. Amy, she said, her good hand plucking at the blanket. I sat beside her. The phone felt cold and heavy in my hand. The clinical voice of the hospital administrator echoed in my ear, each word a precise, sharp blow. Hello, Miss Anderson. Your mother, Martha Anderson, has been rushed to the emergency department. We suspect a cerebrovascular incident, a stroke.